In the 14th century, the Black Death was killing 1/3 of Europe. Doctors were powerless, churches were overflowing, mass graves were being dug across the continent. And in the middle of all of it, a group of grave robbers in France were moving freely through plague-infected homes, stripping the dead of their valuables, and not getting sick. When they were finally caught and brought before a judge, he made them a deal. "Tell me what you are using to protect yourselves, and I will reduce your sentence." Their answer was garlic, steeped in vinegar, applied to the body. That recipe still exists today. It is called Four Thieves vinegar. But here is what makes that story more than just an interesting piece of history. Those grave robbers did not invent anything. They were using knowledge that was already thousands of years old. Knowledge that Egyptian physicians had written down, that Greek soldiers had carried into battle, that Chinese healers had prescribed for generations, that Ayurvedic doctors had documented in ancient Sanskrit texts. Garlic is not a flavoring that happens to have some health benefits. It is the most consistently documented medicinal plant in the entire history of human civilization, and most people use it to make pasta. This is the full story of garlic, where it came from, what every ancient healer actually used it for, why civilizations on opposite sides of the world who never met each other all arrived at the same plant independently, and what modern science has now confirmed about everything they knew. By the end of this, the garlic in your kitchen will never look the same again. The first thing you need to understand about garlic is that we have its identity completely backwards. Today we think of garlic as one of the great flavoring agents of world cuisine, something that makes food taste better, something you might find in a supplement aisle with a lot of other things that probably do not work. But that is a modern idea built on a very shallow reading of history. For most of recorded human history, garlic was not in the kitchen. It was in the medicine room. It was on the battlefield. It was in the temple. It was in the hands of the healer, the soldier, the priest, and the midwife. People ate it because it kept them alive, not because it made dinner more interesting. The botanical name for garlic is Allium sativum. Allium is the Latin word for garlic, derived from the Celtic word all, meaning burning or pungent. That burning quality, the sharp, volatile compounds that make your eyes water when you crush a clove, that is not a culinary accident. It is the plant's defense mechanism, and it turns out that the same chemistry that makes garlic pungent is also what makes it one of the most powerful natural antimicrobial substances ever studied. Ancient healers did not know about chemistry, but they had something better. They had centuries of careful observation across many cultures and many generations. And what they observed, consistently and independently, was that garlic fought infection, strengthened the body, cleared the lungs, protected the heart, and kept people alive in conditions that killed everyone around them. That is not a coincidence. That is a signal. And the ancient world took that signal seriously in a way we have almost entirely forgotten. The oldest written record of garlic being used as medicine comes from ancient Egypt. And it is not a small mention in the margin of some obscure text. It is a detailed, systematic, clinical document. The Ebers Papyrus is one of the oldest and most complete medical texts ever discovered. It was written around 1550 BC, but it contains knowledge that Egyptian physicians had been accumulating for centuries before that. It is 110 pages long and covers hundreds of medical conditions and their treatments. And garlic appears in it 22 times. 22 separate medical applications documented by physicians who had been practicing medicine long before most other civilizations had developed writing. The Ebers Papyrus prescribes garlic for heart conditions, for tumors, for parasites, for headaches, for bites, for abnormal growths, and for conditions affecting the circulation and the blood. These are not vague wellness claims. They are specific clinical prescriptions written by trained medical professionals in one of the most sophisticated civilizations the ancient world produced. But the Ebers Papyrus is only the written record. The actual use of garlic in Egypt goes back much further. Garlic bulbs have been found in Egyptian tombs dating back to 3200 BC, more than 1,500 years before the Ebers Papyrus was written. They were not placed there as food. They were placed there as medicine and protection, the same deliberate sacred intention we see with other medicinal plants in Egyptian burial practice. And then there is the pyramid record. When archaeologists excavated and analyzed the administrative records surrounding the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza, they found detailed accounts of what the workers were supplied with. Among the supplies listed on ancient stone tablets were radishes, onions, and garlic. Historians estimate that enormous quantities of garlic were purchased to keep the pyramid workforce healthy and productive. The Greek historian Herodotus, visiting Egypt centuries later, recorded seeing an inscription on the pyramid itself that he was told listed the amount spent on garlic, onions, and radishes for the workers. Think about what that means. The overseers of the greatest construction project in the ancient world considered garlic essential enough to track it in their official records. Not as a food supplement, as a medicine that kept their workforce functional. The pyramids were built partly on garlic. Egyptian physicians also understood something remarkably specific about garlic that modern science has since confirmed. They noticed that garlic seemed particularly effective against intestinal parasites, which were a major cause of illness and death in a civilization built along a river. The Ebers Papyrus prescribes garlic specifically for worm infestations. Modern research has identified compounds in garlic that do in fact show anti-parasitic properties. The ancient observation was clinically accurate. When knowledge of garlic moved from Egypt into the Greek and Roman world, something interesting happened. It stopped being primarily a temple medicine and became a military one. The ancient Greeks respected garlic deeply as medicine. Hippocrates, writing in the 4th and 5th centuries BC, prescribed garlic for pulmonary complaints, for infections, for digestive problems, and as a cleansing agent for the body. He specifically recommended it as a diaphoretic, meaning something that promotes sweating and helps the body push out illness. Greek athletes ate garlic before competing in the Olympic Games, not for flavor, because they believed it increased their strength and endurance. But it is the Roman military that gives us the most detailed and most dramatic record of garlic as medicine in the ancient world. Roman soldiers were issued garlic as part of their standard military rations. This was not a culinary choice. The Roman military was the most sophisticated logistical operation in the ancient world, and every item in a soldier's kit was there for a specific functional reason. Garlic was there because Roman military physicians understood through generations of battlefield observation that garlic reduced infection in wounds, maintained the strength and endurance of soldiers on long marches, and seemed to protect against the epidemic illnesses that routinely devastated ancient armies. Dioscorides, the Greek physician who traveled with the Roman army in the 1st century AD and wrote De Materia Medica, the most important herbal medical reference in Western history, dedicated significant attention to garlic. He documented it as effective for clearing arterial blockages, for treating persistent coughs, for killing intestinal parasites, for treating skin conditions, for relieving toothache, and for protecting against environmental poisons. He also specifically noted its use for snake and dog bites, noting that it appeared to neutralize certain venoms. The Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder listed 61 separate medicinal uses for garlic in his Natural History. 61. In a single plant. Pliny described garlic as effective against more than 60 different ailments. He documented its use internally for respiratory and digestive conditions, and externally for wounds, skin problems, and infections. He noted that country people, meaning those who worked outdoors and were exposed to the elements, valued it above almost any other plant. And here is the detail that most people never hear. Roman soldiers planted garlic wherever they went. As the Roman legions moved across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, they carried garlic with them and cultivated it in every new territory they occupied. The spread of garlic cultivation across the ancient world tracks almost exactly with the expansion of the Roman Empire. The Romans were not just soldiers. They were inadvertent agricultural missionaries, spreading what they considered their most important medicinal plant across the known world. Here is where the story becomes something much bigger than a Mediterranean herb with a good reputation. While Egyptian physicians were writing garlic into their medical papyri and Roman soldiers were planting it across Europe, something remarkable was happening on the other side of the world. Ancient Chinese physicians, working in a completely separate medical tradition with no knowledge of Egyptian or Greek medicine, had independently arrived at the exact same plant and were prescribing it for many of the exact same conditions. Garlic appears in the earliest Chinese medical texts. In traditional Chinese medicine, it is known as da suan, and it is classified as a warming herb that enters the spleen, stomach, and lung meridians. Ancient Chinese physicians prescribed it for digestive problems, for respiratory infections, for parasites, for diarrhea, for what they described as toxic conditions in the body, and as a general strengthening tonic. These are the same applications being documented simultaneously in Egypt and Greece by healers who had no contact with Chinese medicine whatsoever. The Bencao Gangmu, the great Chinese herbal compendium compiled by Li Shizhen in the 16th century, but drawing on centuries of accumulated Chinese medical knowledge, lists garlic extensively. It documents its use for infections, for digestive disorders, for parasites, for snake bites, and for what Li Shizhen describes as killing toxins in the body. The language is different. The medical framework is completely different. The plant and its applications are identical. In ancient India, Ayurvedic medicine classified garlic as rasayana, which means a substance that promotes longevity and vitality. The Karaka Samhita, one of the foundational texts of Ayurvedic medicine written between 300 and 400 AD but drawing on far older oral traditions, prescribes garlic for heart disease, for arthritis, for digestive weakness, for parasites, for respiratory conditions, and as a general tonic for the elderly and the weak. Ancient Indian physicians also made a specific observation about garlic that is worth stopping at. They noticed that garlic seemed to have a particular benefit for the heart and the circulation. Specifically, that regular use of garlic appeared to keep the blood moving freely and prevent the kind of blockages that led to sudden death. They did not have the vocabulary of modern cardiology, but they were describing, with remarkable accuracy, what modern research now identifies as garlic's ability to reduce arterial plaque and improve cardiovascular function. And then there is ancient Babylon. Archaeologists excavating Mesopotamian sites have found garlic remains in contexts that suggest medicinal use dating back to at least 2700 BC. Babylonian clay tablets include garlic in medical preparations. Sumerian texts reference it. The oldest civilizations on Earth were using garlic as medicine before most of history's famous empires had even begun. So let us step back and look at what we actually have here. Egypt, Greece, Rome, China, India, Babylon. 6 of the greatest civilizations in human history. 6 completely separate medical traditions. 6 different languages. 6 different philosophies. 6 different understandings of how the body works and why people get sick. And every single one of them independently arrived at the same plant and prescribed it for largely the same conditions: infection, parasites, respiratory problems, heart and circulation, digestive disorders, wound healing, general strength and endurance. This is not a cultural trend. It is not something that spread along trade routes, though garlic certainly did travel along trade routes, This is independent convergence. Healers working in complete isolation from each other, using completely different medical frameworks, all arriving at the same conclusion about the same plant. When that happens in science, when multiple independent lines of research all point to the same result, that is considered the strongest possible form of evidence. Not because any single study was definitive, but because the convergence itself is the proof. The ancient world was running the longest and most geographically distributed clinical trial in human history. And garlic passed every time. Every civilization that found it documented it as effective against infection. Every civilization that found it noted its effect on the digestive system and parasites. Every civilization that found it observed some benefit for the heart and circulation. And every civilization that found it used it on wounds and skin conditions. The four thieves of 14th century France were not discovering anything new. They were reaching back into a tradition that was already 4,000 years old. The knowledge had been there the whole time. They just remembered it when everyone else had forgotten. If this is showing you something about garlic you have never seen before, take a second right now and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you have not already. Leave a comment, even just one word. That is genuinely how more people find this content, and it means more than you know. Thank you for being here. Now, let us get into the science. Modern science did not set out to validate ancient healers. It set out to understand the chemistry of plants. But with garlic, the ancient record kept turning out to be right. The key compound in garlic is called allicin. It is produced when a garlic clove is crushed or chopped, triggering a chemical reaction between an amino acid called allium and an enzyme called alliinase. They combine to form allicin, which is one of the most potent natural antimicrobial compounds ever identified in a plant. Here is the thing about allicin that makes it extraordinary. It is not selective. Most pharmaceutical antibiotics target specific types of bacteria. Allicin attacks a much broader range of pathogens simultaneously. Studies have shown allicin to be effective against gram-positive bacteria, gram-negative bacteria, fungi, viruses, and parasites. Not all of them. Not in every case. But the breadth of its antimicrobial activity is genuinely remarkable for a single compound from a single plant. A 2012 study published in the journal Microbiology demonstrated that allicin is effective against a wide range of bacteria, including some antibiotic-resistant strains. Research published in the journal Planta Medica has documented garlic's antifungal properties. Studies have shown it active against intestinal parasites. The Egyptian physicians who prescribed garlic for worm infestations 3,500 years ago were prescribing something that actually worked. Now look at the cardiovascular research. This is where the modern science becomes genuinely impressive. Ancient Indian and Chinese physicians observed that garlic benefited the heart and kept blood moving freely. Modern research has identified multiple mechanisms by which garlic does exactly this. Garlic compounds reduce the production of cholesterol in the liver. They reduce the tendency of blood platelets to clump together and form clots. They relax blood vessel walls, lowering blood pressure. And they reduce inflammation in arterial walls, which is a primary driver of cardiovascular disease. A comprehensive meta-analysis published in the Journal of Nutrition, reviewing multiple clinical trials, found that garlic supplementation produced meaningful reductions in both systolic and diastolic blood pressure. Another large review found significant reductions in LDL cholesterol with regular garlic use. Ancient Ayurvedic physicians prescribed garlic specifically for heart conditions. Modern cardiology research confirms they were prescribing something with genuine cardiovascular benefit. Now look at the immune system research. Roman soldiers were issued garlic to keep them healthy on long campaigns. A randomized controlled trial published in the journal Advances in Therapy found that people taking a daily garlic supplement had significantly fewer colds than those taking a placebo. Those who did get sick recovered faster. The Roman military physicians who kept their soldiers stocked with garlic were doing something that clinical trials have now validated. Now look at the cancer research. This is early and needs to be stated carefully. But population studies have consistently found that cultures with high garlic consumption show lower rates of certain cancers, particularly stomach and colorectal cancers. Laboratory studies have identified several mechanisms by which garlic compounds may inhibit cancer cell growth. The research is not definitive enough to make clinical claims, but the signal is consistent enough that it cannot be dismissed. And then there is the anti-parasitic research. The Eber's papyrus prescribed garlic specifically for intestinal worm infestations. Multiple studies have now documented garlic's activity against intestinal parasites. A study published in the Iranian Journal of Parasitology found garlic extract effective against certain parasitic infections. The 3,500-year-old Egyptian prescription was clinically accurate. The ancient world did not know about allicin or alliinase or blood platelets or LDL cholesterol. But they watched carefully. They observed consistently. They documented precisely. And they prescribed accurately. Modern biochemistry has spent the last century catching up to what ancient healers figured out through generations of careful practice. Knowing that garlic works is one thing. Knowing how ancient healers actually prepared and used it is another. And the methods they developed over thousands of years were considerably more sophisticated than throwing a clove into a pan. Ancient healers worked with garlic in 5 primary ways. The first was raw crushed garlic consumed directly. This is the most potent preparation and the one most supported by modern research. When a garlic clove is crushed, the alliin and alliinase react to form allicin within seconds. Ancient healers across multiple cultures prescribed raw crushed garlic for acute infections, for parasites, and for respiratory conditions. Egyptian physicians prescribed it to be eaten raw. Greek physicians prescribed it raw for pulmonary conditions. Chinese physicians prescribed raw garlic specifically for acute digestive infections. Modern research confirms that cooking destroys much of the allicin, making raw crushed garlic significantly more medicinally potent than cooked garlic. The second was garlic infused in vinegar. This is the preparation the Four Thieves used. And it was not invented in 14th century France. Garlic steeped in vinegar appears in ancient medical texts across multiple cultures. The acidity of the vinegar preserves the garlic's active compounds and adds its own antimicrobial properties. Applied externally, it was used for infected wounds, skin conditions, and as a protective wash. Taken internally, it was prescribed for digestive infections and parasites. The Four Thieves were using a preparation with a documented history stretching back thousands of years before the Black Death. The third was garlic and honey. Ancient Egyptian, Greek, and Ayurvedic texts all document garlic preparations in honey. Honey itself is antimicrobial and was one of the most commonly used healing substances in the ancient world. Combined with garlic, it created a preparation used for respiratory conditions, for sore throats, for coughs, and for general immune support. The combination of garlic's allicin and honey's hydrogen peroxide-producing enzymes creates a preparation that modern research confirms has significant antimicrobial activity. Ancient healers had worked that out without a laboratory. The fourth was garlic oil. Garlic cloves were crushed and steeped in olive oil to create an infused preparation used primarily externally. Applied to infected wounds, to ear infections, to skin conditions, and to painful joints. Roman and Greek physicians documented garlic oil extensively. Modern research has confirmed that garlic oil retains meaningful antimicrobial activity, and a well-known 1994 study published in the Archives of Otolaryngology documented garlic oil as effective for ear infections, which is exactly how ancient physicians had been using it for centuries. The fifth was garlic as a topical direct application. Raw, crushed garlic applied directly to wounds, to infected skin, to bites, and to areas of pain. This was documented across every ancient medical tradition. It was painful. Ancient texts note this. But ancient healers had observed that it prevented infection in wounds in conditions where infection was often a death sentence. Modern research has shown that topically applied, allicin does penetrate skin and does demonstrate local antimicrobial activity. The ancient practice of pressing crushed garlic directly onto wounds was functionally effective medicine. One important thing ancient healers understood that we often overlook today. The timing of preparation matters enormously. Ancient texts are specific about this. Garlic must be crushed or cut and used immediately for maximum medicinal effect. Leaving crushed garlic to sit for long periods reduces its potency. Modern biochemistry explains exactly why. Allicin begins to break down within hours of being formed. Ancient healers had observed the difference in effect between freshly crushed garlic and garlic that had been sitting, and they built that knowledge into their prescriptions. So, what do we do with all of this? Garlic is not a miracle cure. Ancient healers never treated it as one. They understood it as a powerful, well-documented, broadly effective medicinal plant with a specific and well-observed range of effects. They used it precisely, consistently, and across generations. And what they recorded has now been confirmed by some of the most rigorous research tools in the history of medicine. Here are the three things that stay with me most from this story. The first is the convergence. When Egypt and Greece and Rome and China and India and Babylon all independently arrive at the same plant for the same purposes, you are not looking at folklore or coincidence. You are looking at the longest-running and most geographically distributed clinical observation in human history. 6 civilizations ran the same experiment across thousands of years and got the same results. That kind of evidence deserves more respect than we currently give it. The second is what the 4 thieves actually teach us. Those grave robbers in plague-ridden France were not lucky. They were not superstitious. They were using knowledge that serious healers had documented for 4,000 years before them. The knowledge was always there. It was the forgetting that was the problem. We live in an age of extraordinary medical advancement, but advancement is not the same as remembering, and there are things the ancient world knew that we have simply stopped paying attention to. The third is the simplest. Garlic is available. Right now. Today. You do not need a prescription. You do not need a specialist. You do not need an expensive supplement. You need a bulb of garlic, the knowledge of what you are actually holding, and the understanding that every serious healer in the ancient world kept it within reach for a reason. The grave robbers of 14th century France survived a plague that killed 1/3 of Europe. They did it with garlic steeped in vinegar. The Egyptians built the pyramids on it. The Roman army marched on it. The Chinese, the Indians, the Babylonians all kept it at the center of their medicine for thousands of years. We moved it to the kitchen, and knowing that, you can decide where it belongs in your life. If this opened something up for you, the best thing you can do right now is subscribe, leave a comment, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. That is genuinely how more people find this content. Please keep us in your prayers. God bless you.